Welcome to another edition of Ranking the Albums on Rock Show Critique. And our special guest today, the one, the only, Mr. Thom Jennings.
That's me.
Welcome. All right.
Haven't we been here before, Joey?
There you go. There's a reference to our last Ranking the Albums, which of course
There you
was
go.
six. And for
Yes.
this one here, we pulled one out of our hat here. Let's see. We'll give a little teaser here. This band has 10 studio albums. They last played live back in 2019. For
Yep.
that
Yep.
mini show there. But before that, these three guys have not played together since 2007, I believe it was, wasn't it? For Rocklahoma.
There, but you're talking like Rocklahoma, and then they did
Yeah,
Sweden. Yeah.
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 Those were the two gigs they did, and then before that, the prior gig was 1988. And of course, that means we are talking about none other than.
Triumph.
There you go. So let's begin with ranking the albums of Triumph. Did you have anything to add before we start getting into the ranking about the band?
It's interesting. The first show we did ranking wise was Styx, which is actually my very first concert. My very second concert was Triumph. So it's kind of interesting that, and I think people out there, whoever the first three or four acts that they see live, that always leaves an impression on you. And actually, the first time I saw them, I really didn't know their music. They won me over. So, and I've been a huge fan ever since. And I'm a fan of Rick Emmett's solo career and the whole nine yards. I'm excited for the documentary, and that's all I got.
All right. Well, without further ado, let's start in with your number 10 album.
Well, we kind of discussed a little bit of this off camera, and I think I said that Allied Forces is going to be the given number one, which it almost has to be. But I don't think are going to go that route. But I think number 10 is kind of that same category. We have the Edge of Excess. And the Edge of Excess is a post Rick Emmett album. What's really cool about looking at it in hindsight is the guitarist Phil X went on to become a member of Bon Jovi, and Phil X is actually really busy. I mean, if you look him up, he's just done a ton of stuff. He's obviously a guy that loves to record and make music, and supremely talented. All this being said, I love Edge of Excess as an album. I'm not one of those guys that goes, "Oh, if it doesn't have Rick Emmett, it's not Triumph." It's a Triumph album. In some ways, I respect the band for not replacing Rick Emmett with a sound-alike vocalist. Instead, it became almost like a Gilmour solo project. Gilmour's vocal performance on Edge of Excess is outstanding. The production is great. It's very gutsy. It's a good big sounding album. But it is Triumph without Rick Emmett, but it's not as good with Rick Emmett. So I started with my number 10 as the Edge of Excess.
All right. Very good. Well, believe it or not, this might be one of the areas where we're probably going to agree. Mine is also Edge of Excess.
Yeah.
You know, um, I remember when the album came out, 1033 The Fox, they were playing a song off of there. They were trying to push the album. But obviously without Rick Emmett, I think it just a lot of fans just really didn't give it a good listen, like you said. I mean, there's a few
Yeah.
good tracks hiding on there. And and unfortunately that's one of their only one of two albums of theirs that has never charted.
Hmm.
That one and obviously the first one in the US.
Right.
So they knew the writing was on the wall when once the album didn't do anything as from probably what they had hoped. That was the end of it. And it's a good album to have, like you said. I mean, you get to see how Gilmour took over as the sole lead vocalist, and Phil X, like you said, a great talent, has done many things in the music world here. And obviously, his latest thing is touring for Bon Jovi, and he's actually been playing on their last few albums, I believe, as well.
Yep. Yep.
So, I mean, he's definitely a good player if John Bon Jovi picked him out too, as well as Gilmore and Mike Levine. So,
Yeah, great. Again, great guitarist. Definitely different style, different approach to the instrument than Rick. Rick. Rick and Gil. That sort of tension between the two of them, vocally. Rick tending to be the more melodic, Gil kind of the hard rocker, and of course there's exceptions to every rule. But I think that's that kind of synergy and tension between the two of them. Not bad tension, but musical tension between the two is what really drove those great Triumph albums. And it's just lacking on the edge of success. So, and as I said, it's kind of a sad swan song. I wish we were given an opportunity, because Rick Emmett put out some incredible solo albums around the same period and later on in his career. And it's a shame that they weren't able to put one more good Triumph album and kind of go on top.
yeah, I definitely agree. All right, let's bring up that should bring us to your number 9 choice here.
This one, it makes my heart ache a little bit, because it was very hard for me, because this is, again, another album I don't think is bad. I love this album. It's actually the very first Triumph album I ever owned. It's the first tour that I saw them on. There's a lot of great cuts on it. Progressions of Power. I Live for the Weekend, I Can Survive, Tear the Roof Off, 3 classic Triumph songs. Tear the Roof Off was an opener for a while. I Can Survive, that big fat chorus. And I think that this is an album where Gil really shined. Rick has one song on it, Take My Heart, which is a beautiful ballad, but really you didn't get the Lay It on the Line or the Hold On as a follow-up to Just a Game. So I think it was a disappointment commercially a little bit. I think in terms of quality, it's a little bit short. It's got some great songs on it, but it doesn't stack up against some of their later releases.
Well, this might be the second time we agree tonight. My number 9
Wow.
is this. It's hard to believe, but yeah, the second number 9, second least favorite Triumph album, Progressions of Power for me as well. Obviously came out in 1980. Uh, it did actually have a Hot 100 single, and I Can Survive, peaking at number
Yep.
91. And the weird thing is that song did never really got any airplay on the radio. I
No.
mean, when I was growing up, I don't think I've ever heard that song on the radio, but obviously it must have been on there if it made it all the way up to number 91. The album, I think what it did was for the band, what it did was it kind of built them up, which they finally cashed in on everything on the follow up, which is
Yeah.
Allied Forces. I think in concert that they were really always, that was their strong suit as a good in concert band. And I think writing this album, even though it didn't do what they expected, bringing it over, I think it carried up and fueled the fire for Allied Forces. And so I mean that's all I got really on that album. So
I agree. I agree, because I think Allied Forces ultimately is a culmination of the high points of Just a Game and high points of Progressions of Power. And Just a Game, let's face it, is a Rick centric album, and Progressions of Power is a Gil centric album. That's my assessment of it.
yeah.
Gil's songs on Progressions are much better than Rick's on Progressions, and Rick's songs are much better than Gil's on Just a Game. And that's not to say either one didn't have good songs on both releases, but
Mm-hmm.
that's just really the ultimate assessment of that album.
All right, well, let's go on to number 8.
See if we can make this 3 in a row. People can probably tell we actually didn't consult on this too much, because I'm surprised. My next one is the self-titled debut. Now, those in the know, Triumph actually had 2 albums that were released in Canada before they were released in the United States. One just called Triumph, which was later released on CD, is In the Beginning. That's the one we're talking about here. And then there was Rock and Roll Machine. And the Rock and Roll Machine American version is a compilation of the first 2 Canadian albums, Triumph and Rock and Roll Machine. And then Rock and Roll Machine, the Canadian version is different than the US version. So if that didn't confuse you, I don't know what will, but look it up on Wikipedia. It's all true. First Triumph album, great songs on it. Be My Lover's one that kind of jumps off to me. I always thought that was a fun song. Blinding Light Show. concert staple up until about their last two tours, and they always had big mirror ball in it. Great songs on it, but this is where it is. It's as a whole, that first album, it sounds like a first album. They're definitely kind of getting their sea legs in terms of the studio.
All right. Well, my number 8 also is In the Beginning, the first
Wow,
Triumph album.
crazy.
Yeah, I think this is probably where we're gonna part our ways. So I know when it gets down to the wire there, we're probably gonna have a lot of fluctuation, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Build the suspense and see. I would be shocked if it was the same all the way through. So, yeah, just commenting on your points, same exact things I agree on. That album, basically introduced everybody to the band, and you got to see with Blinding Lights show exactly what they were capable of. That's definitely the standout track on that album, which we actually saw it on the Rock and Roll Machine US version to confuse people even more. But
Yep. Yep.
but yeah, that's where that song came from, and that's where it was there. And like I mentioned earlier, that album did not chart in the US or Canada for that matter. But like you had mentioned, it was just an album that back in those days, they didn't really have any airplay. They were more known for their live show even in the beginning,
Yep.
so and that was when I'm not soon how after they recorded that album after Rick came into the band. Do you know offhand?
It was fairly soon. I mean, they were all pretty young when they did that first album. I mean, Rick was the final of the three to join, but I
Right.
don't know. In fact, there's a single out there, it's a 45, which I don't remember off the top of my head, that was recorded with another guitarist that's kicking around. It's a highly sought after collector's item. But yeah, there was a song pre Rick Emmett that was actually released on 45 as their first commercially available recording. And there's the flip side. So there's two songs. I think one of them was a cover. But yeah, this is it. I mean, this is where the band is. I mean, Rick with the whole acoustic bit in the middle of Blinding Light Show lays the foundation for all those other great short acoustic pieces that appeared on every subsequent Triumph album except for Edge of Excess. First albums are first albums. Sometimes, in many ways, it's best not to have a great first album because then you spend the rest of your career chasing it. And in this case, Triumph grew as a band. And again, I think of all these albums, I don't think there's any of them on the list that I wouldn't recommend. Like, I think they're all great, but we got to rank them. So this is where it falls in my mind.
All right, let's go with number 7 for you.
All right, so I'm assuming we're going to attempt to have a deviation here. I got Never Surrender. Now, this was a tough one as well because Never Surrender, pretty cool album. I think Never Surrender suffers from the fact that it was the follow-up to the band's greatest album, which in my opinion is Allied Forces. So they finally break it with Allied Forces. They've established themselves as a full-blown bona fide headliner arena rock act. And they go into the studio. They do Never Surrender. I saw the tour for it. Love the album. To me, it's there's a little bit of darkness to it. The song Never Surrender is pretty complicated and whatnot. There's a couple of great moments, but it doesn't have the kind of wow factor that some of the albums that I picked above it on the list have. So that's where I put Never Surrender. I think you're not going to put it there. So what do we got, Joey?
We've got Rock and Roll Machine, the 1977 release, that peaked at number 182. But in hindsight, that was the band's first charting album. So, to crack the in the U.S. to crack the Billboard 200, you can't go wrong. That's a good sign. That was to let people know that this band was definitely something you better start taking notice of because they were definitely there. And boy, did they ever did they ever get there. Rock and Roll Machine, as we talked about, there's two different versions. There's a Canadian version and then the US release. Because of In the Beginning and the way I just ranked this as the Canadian release. This is the one that has Rocky Mountain Way,
Mhm.
Takes Time, classic Gilmore track. Bringing It On Home, another great song. Of course, the title cut, sung by Gilmore. And then there's the instrumental for that one was the City War March and all that stuff there with Rick Emmett. The title got kind of long there.
Yep.
That definitely is my seventh best Triumph album right there.
All right, finally a deviation. So let's keep with the deviations. So we are up to number six.
Yes.
Number six for me is an often maligned Triumph release, which is kind of depressing because I really enjoyed it. One of the reasons I think that this album doesn't necessarily get the love it deserves is because they didn't really tour in support of it. I think there were 3 shows that they did, and that album is, of course, Surveillance. And this was a slick album. It's very representative of its time. I think the reason, the band cited even years later for them splitting up was because there were a lot of hands in it. The label was kind of meddling, giving them songs to play, making them dress all fancy, rock star-ish, and they tried to sort of rebrand Triumph as something that they weren't. Nevertheless, there's some great songs on here. I mean, Carry On the Flame, I like if that was the only song on the album, it'd still be a great album. I think that it's slick. It's got slick production elements. It's not. It doesn't have the kind of, you know, the authenticity of maybe like a Progressions of Power or whatever. But the
Mhm.
songs, it's the songs. The songs are great. Rick Emmett's vocals are great. Bill Moore's vocals are great. They really, I think, had showed some growth as a band. And I think it's a shame that we didn't get to see some of these songs performed in concert.
All right. Well, my number, what we on, 6 now?
We're on 6.
Yeah. Okay. Starting to lose track here. All right. Well, believe it or not, mine is the same exact album. So
Look at that. So there we go. Back to it again.
yeah, so far one discrepancy out of the first 4 there. It's crazy. All right. So yeah, I mean, this album definitely it's sold because it cracked the top Billboard Top 100. I mean, so it's not like it didn't sell. It cracked in at number 82. Had they toured behind it, who knows? That could have pushed it up even farther on the charts there. But it was the follow up to Sport of Kings, which came pretty quickly after Sport of Kings as well. Considering Sport of Kings, then we'll get into that later. But Surveillance, though, like you mentioned a couple of those songs there. Steve Morse from Deep Purple fame and Dixie Dregs, he actually helped write All the King's Horses. That's a great song.
Yeah.
Off the album, Headed for Nowhere, the Gilmore track there. That's another one that's really stands out. Uh, Let the Light Shine on Me. I mean, there's a lot of good songs on there that a lot of people probably would. If you're a Triumph fan, you never check this album out. I definitely urge you to. This is definitely one of those albums that they would consider a lost classic just listening to it because they're not making albums anymore. So I mean, this is one that
Yeah.
if you missed it, go back and try to hunt it down. It's definitely worth it.
Yeah. And Rick was doing Carry On the Flame and his solo tour for his first album. Absolutely. And, I don't know. I thought it was a great album. I really enjoyed it and said it that my one disappointment is I never got to see him perform any of these songs live because even on those subsequent reunion shows, they didn't play any of the songs.
Right.
You know?
All right. Well,
All right.
that's the
Numero
first.
5, eh?
Yeah. Yeah. What do you got?
I got Sport of Kings. I look at Sport of Kings and Surveillance almost. They almost could have been a 2-album set. I mean, very similar in approach. Somebody's Out There, to me, just a show-stopping Triumph song. Gil and Mike later on said, it was too commercial. We didn't like the direction of the band. That's a great song. The tour was great. They had a lot of fantastic visuals with it. But again, outside writers, definitely you could see that there was a little less of the authenticity, but production's great, sounds big, solid songwritings, big hooks. I mean, it's all there. Take a Stand, another song that thankfully they played live in concert, which, by this point, Triumph was only playing 2 or 3 songs from new albums because they were still playing a lot of the stuff from the earlier catalog. And I think by the time Sport of Kings came out, they stopped playing like Blinding Light Show, which was a bit of a bummer. But they had some good material. There's a live DVD from this particular tour as well that kind of shows where they were at. And of course, the other bit of trivia, as I'm sure you know, Mr. Joey, is that they added a 4th member in their live show for this particular tour.
Yes, the man who actually helped, I believe, write that song you mentioned, "Take a Stand," Mr. Santers. Yes.
You know, the other Rick.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, you're not going to believe this one, but my number 5 is Sport of Kings as well. I mean,
Wow, crazy.
yeah, this is weird how we're like right spot on pretty much so far. I mean, out of 10 albums, you figure we would have been all over the place here. Well, Sport of Kings, obviously, one of the better albums chart wise. It reached number 33. A little soft. I would say out of all their albums, it's the softest album. More, like you said, with Somebody's Out There, the most commercial sounding. But at the same time, Somebody's Out There also is their highest charting single at number 27. So I mean, that song.
Yep.
Definitely a great song. It sold well. It got a lot of airplay. That I'm surprised though, probably because of the fact you mentioned how you thought Mike Levine and Gilmore thought it was too commercial, was probably the reason why they still hold a grudge against it and refuse to play it live over the last few shows that they did in those Rocklahoma and Sweden festival there. But Rick always played it live on his solo tours. I mean, he really loves the song. That was his song. So, just one night, just to give somebody some more trivia here on this song. That's a Gilmore song that he sings on that one. But also to help write it was actually Eric Martin from Mr. Big fame and Neil Sean from Journey, believe it or not.
Yeah. Yeah, and that goes back to what we were talking about. They were not happy with the outside influences and being given songs, but and that's a weird song. Gil singing a ballad like that. I don't think it worked for his voice, but and in some ways, somebody's out there to triumph is what Babe was to Styx. It was a big song. I mean, Babe is the biggest charting single in Styx's career, and they don't really play that anymore. And the band, the other guys in the band were like, it's too sappy. We don't want to become, some yacht rock band that's known for a bunch of ballads. I think Gil especially was, he's a rocker. He liked his Black Sabbath. He was not a guy that he didn't want to be the next Journey. He wanted to be the next Led Zeppelin. So understandable why he might have felt that particular song was a little bit too soft, so to speak. But from a fan standpoint, it's an amazing song. It's a great song. I never tire of listening to that, either hearing Rick do it live or the studio version or anything. It's just catchy, man. It's got a lot of hooks. I love it.
Yeah, the Sport of Kings was actually the only tour I got to see this band on, and unfortunately, it's a shame that I only got to see him at one time because unfortunately this tour, you could tell the tensions were out there. Obviously after creating this album with everything, with all these, a lot of them were outside writers. So there's only about half the album was written by the band themselves. And, the direction, like you said, the record company meddled in here. That was when MCA took over. I think uh, Thunder 7 was the album that MCA was when they were first on MCA. So this was the second one, and they weren't happy with the way the record company, they weren't happy with the way that Thunder 7 performed. So they decided to interject in here, and this is the result of it. It just still didn't work, and all you did was basically break up the band. Really, that's that's where it all started, all the turmoil, and it just came to a head. But having said that, there's a few good gems to listen to, like Tears in the Rain, which was a great song. That's what they opened up with on the tour. Yep.
We'll have to have a dog pause here.
That's all right. I'm used to that. We can.
Hey. They don't even have a reason to be barking. Come here, buddy. Okay, enough. Can't you see Daddy's working?
Okay.
Oh, Guinness, man. Guinness is just sitting at my feet. He's like, pick me up, Daddy. I love
Ah.
you.
All
Yeah. All right.
right. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
we got five. I'm gonna give you a quick glance at Murphy there. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Joey.
no, you're fine. You're fine. All right. So, like we had mentioned, there was definitely some really good songs on this album. "Tears in the Rain" is the song they opened up with on the tour, and they played it again. I think they did play that. They opened up, didn't they open up with that in Rocklahoma and stuff, or was that "When the Lights Go Down"?
I'm pretty sure that they opened with "When the Lights Go Down" in Rocklahoma. I mean, that was "When the Lights Go Down." I mean, I don't know. That's between "Tear the Roof Off" and "When the Lights Go Down." Could you write any better lyrics for the first song of a concert? I mean, either one of them. You know, we're gonna tear the roof off tonight. Fuse is ready to light. You know, that gets you.
Yeah.
That gets your adrenaline pumping.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, when the lights go down, I'm ready to play the blues when I'm ready to go. So those were great songs. But I think you're right. I think that on the Thunder 7 tour, they opened with they might have, no, I don't think they did. I think they opened with "When the Lights Go Down."
I think
We're
they
just
did.
getting
Yeah.
old. We're just getting old, Joey. Just don't remember. Um, I think, and in fact, on the Never Surrender tour, they opened with "Too Much Thinking," and then they did "When the Lights Go Down" later in the show. And I always thought on that tour, I'm like, why are they opening up with this tune when the lights go down? It's a natural opener. But "Too Much Thinking" was a great song to open with as well. But yeah, those two, I mean, bands would kill for songs to open up with like that. Like "Don't Let Him Go." I think of REO Speedwagon. I mean, that's an opener.
Yeah.
So are those two. But yeah, good stuff, man. It was a great tour.
All right. Let's go on to number 4.
All right, 4. So I got "Rock and Roll Machine." So I'm assuming you have "Never Surrender" because I think that's about the only places that we've deviated at this point. "Rock and Roll Machine," the Canadian version, I just love it. "The City" is actually my favorite song on it. They got that whole flamenco guitar bit in the middle, and it's just, to me, the Canadian version of "Rock and Roll Machine" is just a fascinating album. From a
Mhm.
creative standpoint, there's just a lot going on. It's almost borderline progressive rock. It's closest Triumph ever got. And they seemed to take a lot of chances on that particular record. And it was before they were kind of saddled into the AOR stuff or whatever. So I really enjoyed that record. And that's why I gave it to the number 4 spot.
All right. Well, "Never Surrender" also is, like you said, that's the one that I picked for my fourth. Um, it went gold. It released in late 1982, climbed up to number 26, which is looks like that's their best album charting wise, with the exception of Allied Forces. So it was a good follow up. They were right behind that there. So "Never Surrender" for me. I remember everybody walking around the school the next day with their "Never Surrender" T-shirts on, with the album cover. I wish I was one of those people, but I was a little too young to go to the show at that point. But having said that, it's got probably two of my favorite Triumph songs. Someday we'll do a top 10 Triumph song, which will be an interesting, interesting one there. But "World of Fantasy" obviously was the big hit, the one that kind of got all the radio airplay. And actually, a hidden track that I don't, I kind of myself just kind of started to recently really know about this song. For some reason, I just never really gave it a listen or something. But "Writing on the Wall," what a great song. It's not even that
Yeah.
long,
Yeah.
3:39, but that song is excellent. I just don't go, where the hell was I? Why didn't I know about this song for some reason? I had the album, and I just, one of those albums that kind of sat there. Finally got around to listen to it about a year ago, during this pandemic, and really you've got to listen to it all the way through. A lot of good stuff on here. Like you said, "Too Much Thinking." You mentioned that song, the title track. That one was that and "World of Fantasy" were the two that got all the airplay, at least on 97 Rock. Once in a while,
Yeah.
you'd hear "When the Lights Go Down," but not too often. But obviously, they used that song to open many a shows over their whole
Yeah.
career there.
I loved "World Fantasy." That was, to me, that was a great single, and I think it's said, I mean, there's always that pressure to follow up the big album. And in reality, I think a lot of people remember Never Surrender because that was the cash-in album. You know, when
Mhm.
Allied Forces came out, they toured it. They were out our way. They hadn't really broken yet. I saw them at the Auditorium Theater in Rochester on that tour, and that's 2,000 seater. Never Surrender, a year later, they're playing the War Memorial in Rochester to 10,000 people. So, and they weren't playing to 10,000 people because of Never Surrender. They were playing because of Allied Forces, but those people were still getting to hear all those Never Surrender songs. So I think that Never Surrender definitely benefited from Allied Forces and the sort of the propelling them into the next level of stardom. So we're up to the top three. So these top three, I mean, two of the three were tough for me, but I'm going to go with number three, Just a Game. Now, Just a Game is I mean, it is what it is. It's a great album. It's really Triumph's first great album. You got Lay It on the Line, you got American Girls, Moving On. You know, I love how they had with that little fake crowd noise and everything. American Girls, Hold On, Suitcase Blues. I mean, there's not a bad cut on that album. Young Enough to Cry drags a little bit, let's be honest. And maybe that's probably the reason it's 3 instead of 2 or 1. But man, what a great album. I mean, you know, it's fantastic. I think they learned their lesson though too, that with Hold On, one of the reasons the Progressions of Power is a little less, you know, produced is because they couldn't really play Hold On in concert because there was too much going on in the studio version. And they were never able to translate that in a live setting. That's Triumph. Rick did with his bands, but Triumph was never quite able to pull it off. But man, what an album! It came with a little board game in the center of it. You know, I love the artwork. I believe it's the first time that we get to see that Triumph logo with the 2 lightning bolts coming down. So yeah, that's a pretty great album. And I'm saying all this, and that's number 3. So gosh, what do we got coming up?
Well, my number 3 is definitely not the same as yours. I'm actually going surprised. I'm going to surprise you here. We're going with Allied Forces.
Oh,
yeah. Shock City.
You
all right? Heart. You okay? I'm sorry there.
We need a defibrillator.
All right, so let's talk about this album. Only U.S. platinum album, highest charting album for Triumph at number 23, which only beat Never Surrender by 3, mind you. But yeah, Allied Forces, obviously, you know, the songs that made that album were the what they call the big 3. You got Magic Power, obviously, radio staple on classic rock. You got Fight the Good Fight. And, you know, actually the third song I think is the best. The third best song on the album is actually Say Goodbye. Another song they never really duplicated in concert, sadly enough. Great song. You know, and obviously you got Allied Forces and Fool for Your Love and, you know, all that good stuff. But yeah.
Ordinary Man. Come on, Joey. Ordinary Man.
For me, that's one of those songs that kind of takes away from it, which is why it's not number 2 or number 1. Unfortunately.
I don't know if we could stay friends. Yeah, we can. That's all right.
You know, I think Hot Time in the City Tonight is another kind of like a filler too, in my opinion. You know, but I mean, I'll listen to your opinion when we get to you on this one. But you know, other than that, you know, I don't really have too much more on that album. A great album, don't get me wrong. It's just only my third favorite Triumph album. That's all.
Yeah, Hot Time in the City Tonight. They actually used to insert the name of the city they were playing in. So, you know, there's recordings out there. Actually, the new Triumph box set, which I'll be showing you when we get to the number 1 album. You know, they had a live version recorded in Cleveland, and they sing "It's Hot Time in Cleveland Tonight." I remember them doing that in Rochester, and anybody that saw them, that was kind of cool. It was the encore, you know, and they said it's going to be a hot time in, and then they insert, you know, whatever the city was. So that was kind of a fun live one. But you know, you can't be right all the time, Joey. Everybody makes mistakes on rankings. I think you just made a big one, but that's okay. My number 2 is this may be the same for both of us. I got for number 2, Thunder 7. And the reason I chose Thunder 7 as number 2 is because I feel like Thunder 7 is the one Triumph album that sounds like the band as a cohesive unit. You know, there's other albums where, and even to a certain extent, you find this with Allied Forces, definitely with Just a Game. You got Rick songs, you got Gil songs, and songs are clearly Rick's, songs are clearly Gil's, but you don't really have that good vocal interplay between the two. And they just made that work really well on Thunder 7. And the funny thing is, I've heard stories. I mean, Rick used to tell stories at his solo shows that he did the bulk of the work on that particular record, and that he felt like Gil and Mike were disengaged. But Rick said that at the time that the band wasn't really talking, so maybe his memory was a little bit, jaded or whatever. But to me, I just feel like that the two of them just really, all of their strengths, all of the entire band's strengths came together on that particular record. And it's not even that there's songs that are particularly standout songs. It's just, I feel like as an album, it really plays well from the beginning flip to the end.
All right. Well, that's your number 2. My number 2 is actually Just a Game. Like you said, Young Enough to Cry kind of brings it a little bit down, but I still like the song, don't get me wrong. Pretty much the same you mentioned, Moving On, with the fake crowd noise built in there. That was definitely I like how the album started off like that, and that song I did hear on the radio a little bit up here, which was cool. American Girls, obviously, that's a song that kind of got lost in the shuffle in their set list, huh? Yeah. So many of these
Oh yeah.
I first heard
Great
on the
song.
radio, and they just, the thing that always got me though, I was always wondering, and if I ever get to interview Rick, I definitely want to talk to him about this. Probably my favorite song by the band in general, Just a Game itself, that song, the title cut. Great song. It just seems odd that they never played it live, like, during their big tours, after the album came out, uh, afterwards, like the Allied Forces area and that. Great song. It's just that song to me sums up Triumph in a nutshell. Just a great song. I can't say enough good things about it, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, it's an amazing song, but I think Just a Game is, the same reason they didn't play Ordinary Man is because I can't say this because I've asked her, because I know it to be a fact. I'm guessing that the reason they didn't play Just a Game live is because I think that when they recorded it, they knew it was going to be a studio song and it was just never going to be played live. And I think Ordinary Man, like on the Allied Forces tour, it's the only song on the album they didn't play on that tour up to that point. They played the whole album but that one song. And then they pumped it through the PA as fans were leaving the venue. And Just a Game, I mean, like, you listen to what's going on in that song. I mean, there's a lot going on in that song. I mean, you got the fade ins, you got the, multiple guitar tracks, just, keyboards, everything kind of layered in. I just don't think that they could have pulled it off. I mean, the only time they would have had, and even Rick never took a stab at that one during his solo shows. And I mean, his solo bands that I think they ballooned up to like 7 or 8 people. At one point he had like a sax player and, keyboards and all that stuff. So certainly he could have pulled it off, but that's my impression. But you're right. It's a great song. It certainly made it seem like they'd been in the recording industry for a million years, because it's very it's very anti-record company. But Rick in his later years, I mean, that's one of the reasons I think he went independent, because he just didn't like the game. And then of course the band breaks up later on because they didn't want to play the game with the record company, which was having to sing other people's songs and dress in clothes that they were told to dress in.
All right. Well, that takes care of that. Let's get down to the wire here. Numero uno.
There it is, baby. 40th anniversary box set. This one cost me over $100. Don't tell my wife, who's literally an arm's length away. I woke up early to get this one. What can you say about Allied Forces? There's not a bad note on this album. The only person in North America that doesn't love this album the way they should is in fact you, Mr. Joey Suto. You're the only person who doesn't recognize this album's greatness. Artwork amazing, the songs. I mean, and the big thing about Allied Forces, all kidding aside about whether it's their best album or not, is that it was the first album that they were able to record in their own studio. And back in those days, you had to pay for studio time. It got very expensive. There were cases where bands could record a great album, go out and tour it, and make no money because they spent so much money in the studio. And because they had the luxury of having their own studio, they were able to take their time. They did it right. The songs were good. They were powerful. They were radio friendly. They were live friendly. Everything just seemed to come together for this particular record. Ordinary Man, it's a cool song to see, like when Rick does it solo, how people sing along with it. I mean, you could tell that song was something that was really special to fans of the band and fans of Rick. Gil, I mean, Fool for Your Love. I mean, just the drumming on that album, the bass playing, just everything comes together. And it is Triumph's triumph as far as I'm concerned. And yes, I believe, I'm just going to guess because I can't prove this fact, but I bet if I researched it, I bet you it's the album that they still play the most, or that they played the most cuts from throughout their entire career. Because Magic Power, Fight the Good Fight, I mean, those never left the set. Allied Forces, I don't think ever left the set. And they're great songs, man. And then, Say Goodbye, you mentioned that one as well. Hot Time in the City Tonight. I mean, it's just, I don't know, you go on and on.
And you probably would if I let you.
Yes, absolutely. But I can't go too long, or I'll begin to get the death stare from Mrs. Jennings.
All right, well, we're just about done.
She's had to sit here and listen to me yammer, and she lives with me. I mean, you only get the pleasure of listening to me yammer when we do these video things.
All right, well, that brings me up to number one for me. Obviously, if you've paid attention throughout the whole thing, that leaves Thunder 7.
7, yes.
It's my number one, believe it or not. The 1984 release went gold. One of their few gold albums. Reached number 35. And, over here on our radio station here, Classic Rock Station, it got a lot of airplay. We heard Spellbound, Follow Your Heart, and of course, Time Goes By. 3 great songs, which they actually played all, in concert on the tour, which I unfortunately was not able to see. But, I think the album, I like how it starts off, Spellbound, and it goes into Rock Out, Roll On, not a song that a lot of people will, it doesn't probably stand out for a lot of people, but the way, if you play this album from from beginning to end, the way it flows, the flow of the album is the key here with this one, for me anyhow. It goes from Rock Out, Roll On to Cool Down to Follow Your Heart. Now, if you look at things, Follow Your Heart, definitely an inspirational song there. You got Gil and Rick both singing it together throughout the whole song, the chorus and everything. And also Killing Time, another great song where they both that's the song. Killing Time to me is actually the one that really stands out, how they sing it together. And that when they were on their game, that's what you get. I'm not sure why that song never really wasn't released as a single. I don't know why not, because it really showcased, the band as a unit with the singing there, and Stranger in a Strange Land, another great song that never really gets its just due. So, I just love the way the album flows from beginning to end for me. There's not a track that I skip. I'm not a big fan of Time Cannon, but the way it flows into Killing Time, you can't really not play it. You know what I'm saying?
Yep. Yep. And it's woven. All the songs are woven together. I mean, it's thematically kind of cool as well. I mean, it's the closest they ever come to a true concept album, because the concept of time is certainly present throughout the tracks.
Yeah,
and
I too. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I agree. Even though it's not their best album, in my opinion, I can't necessarily begrudge you for putting it within the top 3. So, I mean, it's a great album. And, like we said, starting this whole thing out, the hard part with Triumph is that Triumph really doesn't have a true dud of an album, which I think is unusual. I think bands always lay an egg or two. I mean, I can't think of many bands that I can't look to one album and say, "Oh, that's a stinker." But there's nothing here. I mean, it's all great stuff. And Rick's solo career is an extension of that. I mean, Rick really went on to have an incredible solo career, exploring so many different musical styles. It just never rested on his past, but always paid homage to it. So that's why I've loved being a Rick Emmett / Triumph fan for all these years. And I've had the honor of interviewing all three of the guys, and you know what? They didn't disappoint me. Not one of them. Every one of them was a great interview. Took a lot of time. I think I interviewed Rick 5 times. He got to the point where he's like, "Well, my old friend." I'm like, yeah, "That's very nice to hear, Rick." So yeah, sentimental stuff, great stuff. I'm glad it's a band that you and I both love, and I know that anybody watching this obviously loves them, or they wouldn't be watching it because they wouldn't care.
Exactly. All right. Well, that puts a wrap on this episode. Stay tuned. We have many more episodes to come. And just keep commenting on our YouTube page there, and let us know what your
Yep.
rankings are for each album. It's always good to see what other people think. Definitely. And any last parting things?
Just thanks for the opportunity to do this, Joey. I've enjoyed it. It's always great. I think that some people say, "Oh, ranking is a useless exercise," but you know what it does? It makes you go back to those old albums, and you get to enjoy them again. It gives you an opportunity to think about them. It helps you discover some songs or rediscover some songs that maybe you didn't hear when the album first came out. So that's the purpose of these things. It's not to stir up any controversy or my album selections are better than yours. It really is just kind of get you thinking and going back and putting on an album and saying, well, that makes sense that Joey has Thunder 7 #1, or it makes sense that Thom has Allied Forces #1, but somebody else could have Edge of Excess as #1. Anything is possible.
That's true.
I'd be surprised, but it could happen. Somebody out there, Phil X's mom probably has Edge of Excess as her favorite Triumph album.
All right, Thom. Thank you for your time, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Sounds great.